Okay, quick recap on the last lesson. We set up Visual Studio Code, we installed Docker Desktop, and then we created a dev container.json so that we can spin up Visual Studio Code inside Docker so that we're running in a virtual environment. So if you haven't done that already, follow the last tutorial. If you have, and you've loaded up Visual Studio Code, you've loaded up Docker, just make sure you actually open it in your container. So the little blue thing in the bottom left, click that and then open in container. I've already got it, so it just says rebuild. Great. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is make a FastAPI application. The reason that we're going to use FastAPI and not Flask is because it creates an OpenAPI spec, which is just this. It generates this automatically in OpenAPI v3, and the version 3 is what we need to use when we add it to tools like GPT or any other AI tool that wants to interact with an API automatically. There is an alternative to this. You can use Flask, and that's it's been around for longer, but it doesn't generate this specification that we're looking for, so it doesn't make it quite as easy. So in general, most things these days, when you're looking at these tutorials for all these new AI things, if they're using Python and they want to have an API, it's probably using FastAPI. So that's why we're going to do it. Just a little bit about what FastAPI is and Flask. When you write Python, you're just writing Python code, but if you want to actually make that into something like this, which has got different endpoints that you can interact with programmatically, to make it easier, you just use something called FastAPI or Flask. So it's a micro framework. It just makes it really easy to make these things. If you want to know more about it, you just have to put it into ChatGPT and see what it says. Okay, so let's get started. What we're going to do is we're going to make our application. You can actually fit all of this inside a single file, but just because we're going to make this a little bit more production ready, because the next tutorial that we're going to be looking at is going to help productionize this and get it hosted in the real world on Google. And just to make it a little bit more ready for production and the way that you would work on it after you've done that, we've just separated it out into different files, but I'll go through all the different things and explain what they mean anyway. But just to give you an example of this working as a single file, let's just make a new chat. Write a FastAPI app that runs in a single file. I can run with multiple endpoints that I can run directly in VS Code. And this will give me some code. It's going to make a FastAPI app. There you go, FastAPI app. Giving us some models, some routes. Yeah, it's all good. And then hopefully at the end, it'll give us this. Brilliant. So I'll copy that, make a new file, call it test.py. I'm going to dump that in here. Now, something to remember, I've already got the things that you need here, FastAPI and Pydantic installed on my machine. But if this is the first time that you've done this, you'll have to install these for this to work. You don't need to worry about that because we're going to actually split this up and put these installs into our requirements file, and then it'll just work. So all we've done is copied and pasted this. Let's just see if it runs. So I'm going to click this little play button. Yeah, open in browser. This is the IP and the port that it's running on. And if we do /docs, it'll give you this. So items, get, put, delete, post. These all link up to these routes here. You can see get, post, put, and they match up exactly. So what is this? We're going to go through each individual part and then we're going to break it out into its own file so that you understand what it's doing. And also we're going to go through the requirements.txt file because that's how you actually install any of this stuff. So first of all, let's look at the app. So FastAPI, this is effectively the engine So we're going to make one instance of this, and everything's going to plug into this. So this is the engine of the car. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some seat belts and some safety to it. So that's what these are. When you see pedantic base model, this is giving you a way to validate the data that comes in. So if I'm expecting an item, it's always going to have a name, description, price, and tax, and the name's always going to be a string, the description's always going to be a string, the price is always going to be a float. And if it's not that type of data, it's just not going to make it to the application. It's going to prevent that from happening. And the same goes for data going out as well. So if you just double click this, you can see here we've got item. This is actually the data coming in. We're not formatting the data on the way out here, but I'll show you in the next example of formatting the data on the way out. So in this example here, we're just saying when I receive data, I always receive data in this format. And if we just go and check out the API, let's take a look. Name, description, price, and tax. So that's what that's what it says it accepts. So you can see it's automatically generated that because the put endpoint here accepts an item. Now there is another variable here. It also accepts a variable in the actual URL string. So if we go back to here, you can see it accepts a variable in the URL string there. So this is slightly different, but either way, you're accepting the body and we've got a variable here, so both work. So yeah, this is like adding seat belts and safety to the actual vehicle. So we've got the engine, then we've got some safety attached to it. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add on the steering wheel so we can actually drive the engine. And that's what these routes are. You can see app, this is the instance of the application. And that's what we're going to use here. And app.get means it's a get request. So you get information out of it. App.post is a post request, and you see the endpoints are all items. Some of them are the same, but because they've got different methods here, they'll get rendered with different methods, so you can do different things with them. So we've got the steering wheel, and finally we've got the keys. This is how you actually turn the engine on. So you've got the engine, you've got the safety, you've got the steering wheel, and then we want to be able to do something with it, because at the moment it's just sat there all by itself. So when we come to actually run this, the reason this worked is because we've pressed this little play button, which means play this file. If name equals main, means this is the file that I'm actually running. It's not being imported from somewhere else. So that is going to get run. Import Uvicorn. This is actually how to turn the engine on. This is the server that runs the code itself. Uvicorn.run. So pass in the app, and then where we want to host it. So this is localhost, and then the port that we want to host it on. So 127.0.0.1, port 8000. If we go and check 127.0.0.1 and port 8000. So that's where it all lines up to. Great. The final thing is the requirements. So if we've got the rest of it is the way we've described the vehicle, the engine, the safety, the steering wheel, the key. This part here, requirements, is the actual raw materials. So this is the metal that goes into the vehicle itself to build all of the engine and anything else that we might add to it. You know, if we want a door, we've got to bring the door to the party. So instead of just doing it in the command line down here, which you normally would do pip install FastAPI like this, it's going to say it's already satisfied because it's already installed. Instead of having to write that command, you just add a requirements.txt file and then put in everything you want here. Normally you'd assign it to a version as well, so it's a specific version so that you know everything works well together. Great. That's an entire FastAPI application. And what we're aiming to do as part of this tutorial is just take that and get it productionized, which just means take it from our computer and put it into Google, get a URL, and then connect it up to GPT. And that's what we've got here, which is test GCP API. This is actually connected to a running API that I've got, which you should be able to see here. This is a URL. I didn't buy this URL. You just get this for free when you host it on Google using Cloud Run. And these endpoints are available to use. So you can see what's in the basket. So item 1, item 2. And if I go into GPT, it's using the API as a tool or as an action. So it's got different tools available to it. So as I'm talking to it, having a conversation, just normal GPT conversation, could be that I ask about items in the shop. And instead of it just trying to make up some items in the shop, it'll use this action that it's got available. It'll call this URL, and it'll see these endpoints and it'll go, how would I get the items from this shop? And it knows to use the get endpoint. So just show you, get items from the shop. So item 1, item 2, add 3 new items to the shop. Make up whatever funny names you want to add. Which is quite cool. This is actually going to interact with the API. It's going to figure out that it's got to use 3, using the word 3, not even the number. And then it's going to use the post endpoint to add 3 different items. So it's added these 3 here, and just to prove that it's actually added it, we'll go back to our API, get, and then click execute. We'll be able to see wacky waving, giggle juice, blah blah blah, all that stuff. And again, just to show you how cool this stuff is, like this is a very simple example, but in terms of using agents and AI models that can interact with tools all by themselves, it's just an example of how they can control the actual workflow and work with different tools to get what they need to get done. Delete everything. Again, I'm not saying delete items 1, 2, and 3 or whatever I'm saying. I'm just saying delete everything that you've got. Which is going to be a weird one, actually, because I don't know if it needs to find what's in there first. Oh, interesting. Let's see. Wow, so I think it did a GET request, and then it deleted every item that it could see. 1, 2, 3... Maybe it just remembered what we had. Yeah, I think it just remembered what we had. But still, that's cool. And that's what we're going to do with this tutorial. So we've got our application. We've got it up and running here in one file called test.py. But we don't want to have it in one file. Like I said, we're going to split it up, make it a bit more manageable, and just make it easier to work on down the line once we've actually got real fun apps that we're making in real life. So first of all, we'll just take this. This is the engine, and that's just been put into the main. We're inside the app folder in the main.py, and you can see exactly the same FastAPI. All we've done is add a title and a version. The next thing that we've done is all these roots here. Now I've just got it in a normal file, but you could have it in a folder with different roots. We're going to import. Got the engine here, and we're going to add the steering wheel. So you can see up here from app.roots. So app roots import router. I'll just show you what the actual router is. This is the roots file at the top from FastAPI import API router. And much like we started the FastAPI engine over here, we're starting something similar, kind of like a smaller engine specifically for these routes, and that's called the API router. And we're assigning it to this variable, and then we're importing this specific variable here. That's what this is doing. The next part, now, the main reason we're using FastAPI is because a couple of reasons, but one good one is that it generates these OpenAPI v3 specs all by itself. You don't need to add any extra code. The only thing it doesn't know is where it's going to live once it gets into the real world. So it just doesn't have any awareness of that. So this is kind of like adding the GPS, so that when it gets out into the real world, turn the GPS on, it can say, hey, where am I? And then you can start using, then it knows where it is, so you can actually use it in real life. This is in the config section. So custom API, this is just something that we've made, app.config, app config. custom open AI, open API. And it's just a function. GPT made this. It's really simple. It may look complicated, but effectively all this is doing is adding this section here, servers, and it's taking it from an environment variable. So when the application gets deployed, it gets a URL, and that URL, we don't really know what the URL is going to be. It depends on the environment we deploy it to. But once we deploy it, we're going to say, take that URL and store it in memory in the location that you're in. And then when the application gets deployed, it's going to go and find that in memory, and it's going to be called base URL. And it's going to add that to the OpenAPI spec, which means that when we browse our application, it can become aware of where it actually lives. So it makes it really simple to deploy and use with tools like this. I'll just show you what that actually means. So the URL for our API is this. And if you want to automatically generate the OpenAPI spec, which is how an application sees it, you just add open/openapi.json on the end. You see OpenAPI, v3 spec, that's what we want. Bunch of information about the different endpoints. And right at the bottom, the bit that we've just added is this. This is our GPS, just the servers section, just a dictionary. And this URL here is the URL of the actual application. If we copy all of this, just literally copy it, go to GPT, add a custom GPT. So if we were gonna, we've already got one added. So my GPTs, add one in there. I've got this one here, so we're just gonna edit it. It doesn't let you use the same URL for two GPTs, so I have to show you in here. You'll start in the Create tab, click Configure, and down at the bottom where it says Actions, this is how it gets different actions or different APIs that it can use. So it's going to click that, and you'll see here, literally, you copy and paste what we've just taken from here. And that will automatically pull out these different endpoints, and once you press Save, in your conversation, like we just did a second ago, it can start using your API. That's it. You've connected GPT to your API, and you can start doing things with it, which is really cool. And we can start doing loads more fancy things with it beyond just asking for items from a shop. Okay, so that's our GPS. That's this section here. Again, you can see they're all just bolting onto the engine. App.includeRouter, app.openAPI. This is the bit that automatically generates the documentation in the first place. We're just adding our custom bit on to override that and just add an extra little bit. And down here, I know we've got all of our routes in a different file, which we'll go through in a second, but the main primary base URL, sort of base route, which is just go to the URL and put a slash on the end, I've just left that in here. And the main reason is this is a bit like, you know, we've got the engine and then we've got the drive shaft and then we've got the steering wheel up there, and the steering wheel's all our different API routes. But this drive shaft is just connecting the engine to all the different places. You don't normally have to set anything here, but I've just put in a redirect, which redirects to /docs. And this just makes it a nice experience. If you go to the actual URL just by itself, it redirects it to docs. Otherwise you won't end up on this page. You might just end up on a page and not really know what to do. And that's it. That's what's inside main. So we've taken this, added a few extra details, we've put it in here. The next thing we're going to do is take the steering wheel, take all these endpoints, and we're going to put them into routes. So I've already showed you how we added the steering wheel here, app.includeRouter, and we added the variable that we assigned this new little mini engine API router to. You can see at the top we've got to import this from FastAPI. And then we just added a few extra bits here to make it nicer. The prefix just means all of these routes that use this are going to start with /shop, and the tag means that we put them all together in one section called shop. So that's the tag, and all of the routes have got this /shop on, and then whatever we put in the route, so items, all this stuff. Simple as that. The safety stuff, the models, all you have to do is make a new class, call it whatever you want, and put base model inside here. So from Pydantic, import base model. And then you put the specific things that you want it to check. So in this case, we're just going to say, if you're using this, I'm expecting it to have an attribute called message that is of type string. And if it doesn't have that, let's say you're receiving it, it's just, it could be an integer, it could be, I've got messages or, something totally irrelevant. If you can't find that, it's not going to come in. And the same works for data going out as well. So anything that we send out, if they're expecting it in a certain format because they've got to do something with it, we just make sure that that's always going to be in that format, or they're not going to get anything at all. And that's all these are, same thing. Here we've added a little bit of, instead of what we would do in the main application, what we will do is we're going to add a database, but just for simplicity, we've just created a sort of global variable that just sits here that they can all access. And then we just update this dictionary. It's a list of dictionaries. We update it, we take data out, we put data in, and that's it. But this is just storage for now, temporary storage. Okay, so the steering wheel. You'll notice before in the test, these all said app. That's because that was the main engine of it. In this case, they say router, and that's because we've got this mini router engine here. So that's called router. So instead of app, whatever you make your little engine with, call it a variable, and then that's what will be down here. The @ sign, this is a decorator. You don't need to know too much about this. Again, put it into GPT. But the main thing to know is this is how we're going to use FastAPI. So FastAPI is just taking Python and making it so that we can make these API endpoints really easily. And this is showing you how easy it is. You literally add that line, you've got a API. Slash items. So because we've got this prefix up here, /shop, we're going to /shop /items. And this .get means it's going to be a get request, post, whatever you put after the dot is going to be the type of request that you get here. This is how you actually add the seatbelts on. So you can see response model. This is item. So the item response model is here. That's going to return an ID and a name of an integer and a string. Simple as that. And the item that it takes in, so this is the data that we receive from the endpoint. That's going to be, this is actually, I've updated it. This is a different version, but what the data that you receive in here, if it was a different model that just had name and string, that's what it would accept. But in this case, we're looking at one that says, oh no, yeah, name and string. There you go. Name and string. So that's just saying this is all I'll accept. If you give me anything else, I'll reject it. And it does mean that you can put in, it could be that more data comes in and it can find that information. It'll just pull out that information and only pass that information on. So it doesn't have to be that it's just in that shape. You can have more than that and it'll just pull out that information. So you're just cleaning that data on the way in, nice and simply. So that's how you use the seatbelts. And finally, just return some data. So just returning a bit of data. Okay, so that's the routes. This is our steering wheel. This is how we drive the engine, the way into the application that other people are going to interact with. Config, we've done config. Requirements, again, I've been through this, but this is just the raw materials that you need to actually build this. So this is the metal, the door, everything that you need to put this together. You add them in here, and these are just anything that you put import in. So in here, if it's at the top, FastAPI, we're going to have FastAPI. Now, Pydantic, that you just get by default, I think. If you don't, maybe I've just got it installed, but I think you just get that by default with Python. But if not, again, you'll just add that into the requirements file and just put it in like this, C, and that's it. And when it comes to installing these, you can either get down on the command line, do pip install. Pip is a Python install package manager, whatever it's called. Pip install -r, which means requirements, which means use this file, and then you just put in the requirements file, and that will install everything that's in here. Everything's already been installed, so we don't need to do anything. So these are the raw materials requirements. Remember R, raw materials requirements. And the next thing, finally, is the key to turn all of this on. So we've got our engine, we've got our steering wheel, we've got all of the materials to build it, we've got our safety all locked and loaded, but it's not doing anything. It's just sat there. Like, how do we actually turn the car on and start driving it? And that's where these commands come in. Now you can just run these on the command line. This is being done in this way just to help us slightly later, further down the line in the productionizing process. I'll explain why as well. So you could just run this, or you could down here you could be like movie corn and then run and pass in some information, and that would start it up. You could, when you start it, use command line commands to start it up, which is a common way to do it when you're using Docker. But because we're going to be productionizing this and running it on a distroless container, again, chat GPT that, but it means it's a really super lightweight car. It doesn't have any of the things that you don't need. It's just this Python application that we're going to be running. It doesn't have commands. It doesn't have bash that we can run. So in order to get around that, we've got to use Python itself to run those commands. And so that's how we're gonna turn this engine on. We're gonna start this, and this is gonna run the uvicorn server, and it's gonna start it up, and it's gonna find app.main, which is app, and then main, and then inside here, after these colons, inside main, it's gonna find the engine, and that's just gonna turn it on. And the host, this just means listen, it can serve traffic publicly, and the port up here. And we're going to get the port from, a bit like we did with the URL, we're going to get the port from the environment variable. Now, the reason that we're getting this dynamically is we're going to deploy it to a containerized environment, and it could be that it doesn't end up on the port that we want here. And if we take it dynamically, if it gets assigned a different port, it doesn't make a difference to us. So it just makes the application a lot more portable. Great, there you have it. That's how you make a fast API application, stand it up and get an endpoint running. Feel free to follow through. Just make sure you install your requirements first. I'd say if you want to see an application up and running, do what I've just done here. Ask GPT to make it, and it'll just make an application. If it doesn't run for whatever reason when you press this, just ask it for the commands to run it, or say add it to say I want to run it in VS Code, and I'll add this bit on the bottom automatically for you. The reason we've not started this here yet is because what we're going to do in the next tutorials is start to go to the next stage, which is how do we package this application up, which is using Docker, and the one after that is going to be how do we take that Docker image and put it into Google and get it running in a totally scalable environment, but it scales right down to zero cost. I've got about 100 different revisions running at the moment, and it's cost me about 2p, and that's just because I've not deleted a bunch of stuff for storage. It's not even the actual cost of running this API. So it scales to 0. When it gets hit, it starts up, and it can scale effectively to, in our case, for all intents and purposes, infinity. Brilliant. That's the end of the tutorial. See you next time.